Hi, my name is Jed Selkowitz, Senior Vice President of Communications at Americares, and I'm here today with Americares Senior Pharmacist Erin Briggs to ask Erin a few questions about COVID-19 vaccines. Erin, when will a COVID-19 vaccine be available in the United States?
A COVID-19 vaccine is expected to be available in the United States before the end of December. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has approved emergency use for the first COVID-19 vaccine, and more are in the pipeline. However, vaccine distribution is expected to roll out in phases, so initially, as vaccine supply is expected to be limited, the focus on vaccination will be on high priority populations. The vaccine is expected to be available to the broader population in the United States within the spring.
And how many COVID-19 vaccines are currently in development?
There's over 190 COVID-19 vaccines in development, with over 50 in human clinical trials. There's currently 3 vaccines that have reported preliminary results.
How effective are the COVID-19 vaccines that have been in development currently?
The effectiveness has varied with the preliminary results of the vaccines. We're seeing that Moderna and Pfizer have reported vaccine efficacy of over 90%. AstraZeneca reports vaccine effectiveness at 62 to 90%, which is a 70% on average, and that depends on the dosage of the vaccine that was received by the participant.
So how do we know if a vaccine is safe and effective?
Safety and efficacy of the vaccine is determined through human clinical trials. So these clinical trials involving thousands of volunteers are typically conducted in 3 phases, and all 3 phases will test for safety and efficacy. And then in the United States, the FDA reviews data from the clinical trials before granting permission to use the vaccine. Globally, we have the World Health Organization, which also independently reviews vaccine safety and efficacy. So countries really rely on the WHO recommendations when deciding on which vaccines to provide to their citizens. The WHO will work with vaccine manufacturers and then health officials in each country and other partners to monitor any safety concerns on an ongoing basis.
So normally this process takes a very long time. How were these vaccines developed so quickly? Were steps skipped in the usual process?
No steps were skipped in the usual process of vaccine development. So each stage of vaccine development occurred from the preclinical phase to the 3 phases of the human trials with the usual number of participants. So the vaccine development timeline, which typically takes about a decade, was accelerated due to unprecedented financial investments in scientific collaboration. So the clinical trials and the criteria for the approval of a vaccine are still as rigorous as they have always been.
Once people start getting vaccinated in the United States, can we stop wearing masks and physically distancing?
The COVID-19 vaccine clinical trial results only really showed that the vaccines can prevent disease or prevent serious disease. So they're reducing the number of illnesses and possibly reducing the number of hospitalizations. However, we really don't know if these vaccines are going to stop a person from transmitting the coronavirus to another person, or if the person can become an asymptomatic carrier. That being said, we must continue preventative measures that we've already been doing this year. So avoiding large crowds, social distancing, wearing masks, and practicing good hygiene until the transmission of the virus is low enough to allow us to ease off of these gradually.
If someone's already had COVID-19, do they need to be vaccinated?
Those who have already been infected with COVID-19 and have recovered have been shown to have immunity around 5 to 6 months at best. So it's likely that the vaccine will still be recommended to those people. However, what we don't know at this time is to what extent the prioritization of these people are going to be in terms of when they will get the vaccine and whether that will be later in the process because they already have some built up immunity. So it's likely that we'll find out more guidance from the CDC around this topic in the near future.
You mentioned the importance of vaccines. Why is vaccination important?
So vaccination is historically safe and effective way to prevent infection or disease and to save lives. Immunizations prevent 2 to 3 million deaths every year from diseases like diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, influenza, and measles. So when we get vaccinated, we aren't just protecting ourselves, we're also protecting those around us. So think about some people who are seriously ill or immunocompromised. They're advised that they can't get a vaccine. So they depend on the rest of us to get vaccinated so that we can help reduce the spread of the disease.
What percentage of the population needs to be vaccinated to achieve herd immunity?
So right now we don't know enough about immunity after coronavirus infection or vaccination to say exactly what percentage of the population will need to get vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. With some diseases, it takes vaccinating about 60 to 70% of the population in order to achieve herd immunity. But then in some instances, there needs to be at least 95% of the population to be naturally exposed or to get the vaccine for herd immunity to occur. So we'll likely have a better understanding of this percentage rate after more people become vaccinated.
What can I do now to protect myself from COVID-19 since it may take quite some time for the full general public to be vaccinated?
So the best way to protect yourself is to do what you may have already been doing this year, covering your mouth with mouth and nose with a cloth face covering, minimum of 2 layers, but preferably 3 layers, or a non-surgical mask when around others. Avoid crowds and stay at least 6 feet apart from others. So universal face masking is now recommended not only by the WHO and the CDC, so meaning a cloth mask should be worn indoors and outdoors in crowded locations. And then the CDC also recommends washing your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially if you've been in a public place or after blowing your nose, coughing, or sneezing. If soap and water are not available, you can also use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer as long as it has at least 60% alcohol.
Will other vaccines like the flu vaccine protect me from getting COVID-19?
Unfortunately not. Only vaccines being developed for COVID-19 will protect against coronavirus infection.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for being here and answering these great questions with us today. And for all those watching, please continue to go to Americares.org to check back for additional updates. And thank you for joining us. Stay safe.